Hello guys, Oscar here, and welcome back to another Minecraft tutorial. Now today we're going back to basics with Redstone, and don't worry, there's going to be a lot more to this tutorial than just these 4 things. But I figured, it's been a long time since I've done a very basic tutorial on how to get started with Redstone, and honestly the first one that I did was my first ever video. It wasn't all that great, so I thought we'd do an updated video and do something pretty and just basically say how to get started with Redstone. All the basic concepts, how to use them, how to build a redstone machine, stuff like that. Stay tuned and we'll get right into it. Okay, so for the first part of this tutorial, I'm going to be talking about 3 things, and those are the 3 main types of components, I should say, of redstone machines. Now, we're starting out here with power sources, but the other 2 are active and passive components. And power sources are just that. They're the power redstone, basically just allowing the machine to work. So here, these are the 4 simplest power sources. There's a lot more, and I guess if you really got technical, you could probably say there were a few more than what I'm thinking of even, but these are the very basic ones. So we got your lever, it can toggle on, it can toggle off. You got a button, you hit it once and it goes for a certain amount of time. You got a pressure plate, you step on it and it goes for a certain amount of time. And you got a redstone torch, and I'll be getting more into the redstone torch later because that one's a little bit more complicated. But the lever is pretty simple. I bet you guys can figure all that out, on, off. But the button is actually a little bit interesting. Now, a stone button, and for that matter a stone pressure plate, will activate for exactly 10 redstone ticks, or which is exactly 1 second when it's pressed. Right there, that's exactly 10 redstone ticks. And 1 redstone tick is exactly 1/10 of a second, so if you ever want to make a conversion, that's what it is. It's really simple. And a wooden button of any kind, anything like this, those do 15 redstone ticks, so 1.5 seconds. And also, if you're on a pressure plate and you stay on it, it'll stay for longer, and then it's only when you get off of it that timer starts. And so that's how these 2 work. They're not toggleable like this is, but they're still very useful. And and that brings us on to the next power source. This one's a little bit interesting because there's some stuff that has to do with interesting things with powering stuff with this, and we'll be getting that into that more later. But mainly, the biggest thing here is that if you take a block, actually here, let me get a good looking block, and your redstone torch, you see that it's powered. But when a redstone torch receives an input, it actually turns off, which is really useful in certain applications, which we'll be getting into later. But that's pretty much how this works. It's pretty simple, at least at its heart it's simple. You can use this in really complicated designs, but those are the basic power sources. Now we'll be getting into later on. We'll be getting into more about what the different types of components do and how to use them, and so just stay tuned for that. But for the meantime, let's go on to passive components. Okay, now this next section, these are called the passive components. This is all my own terminology, so I don't know if that's actually what it would be called on the Wikipedia page, but I like to call these components passive components. And they do some of their own unique things, and we'll be getting into those later, but the basic idea is that they're the ones that carry a signal and manipulate it into what you want. So obviously the easiest way to do this is just with redstone dust. You see, it literally just powers. It's the super simple one, really. But you'll notice that when redstone dust is powered from something like this, it only goes out 15 blocks, 15, until it gets unpowered. Now that's because right at the start of a power source, the signal strength is 15, and after that 15, you can't really do anything with it. Which brings us on to the next passive component. And this is what makes it a little bit unique: is that not only does it transport a signal, it also extends the signal for the repeater. This specifically. So what you do here is, if you take your repeater, you go all the way out here to the end of your line, go there, and it'll actually refresh it. So now you have another 15 blocks to go, which is probably the most used feature for this, but there are a few others. And the biggest feature for this one would probably be its delay. So you'll notice here that if you click on something, it changes, and when it does that, that's actually changing the amount of delay that repeater can be set to. So by default, it's at 1 tick of a delay, which, like I said before, is 1/10 of a second, and it increases to 2, 3, and 4 ticks of delay, and then back to 1. And so you can use this if you wanted to make a delay. Right here, we could say between powering this and having this signal actually turn on, we'll have a 4-tick delay. There we go. And you can actually run repeaters into each other to get really long delays. Like this would be a 1.2 second delay. Exactly, until this is powered. And then it's once again a signal strength of 15, which goes along there, which is probably one of the most useful functions for this. But you'll notice that's not all. Another thing that it can be used for is when you take these two side inputs. So if we take a look at the repeater here, you'll notice a big arrow like that, and that shows the main orientation of this repeater. And in here, this is the main input. Right here, this is the output, and then these two are the side inputs. And it's not actually going to show because it's not one of the main inputs. But the main input right here is what will do the delay, it does the most of the work. Honestly, you hardly ever use the side inputs. But what the side inputs are for is what's called the repeater locking mechanism, and that's if you run another repeater in like this. You'll actually you can lock the repeater at whatever state it was. So right now it's not powered. And if we lock it, when we power this, you'll see a little piece of bedrock. Now it won't be powered ever, until we unlock it at least. And then if you unlock it, it goes back to its neutral state, so it can be powered and unpowered. But then if it's powered and then it gets locked, you'll notice now it will never be unpowered. See, we can unpower. Oh, never mind. If you go here and lock it, yeah, you'll notice it never gets unpowered until it gets unlocked. And those are the three main uses of repeaters. Another one is for powering and taking signals out. We'll be getting more into that later. But in the meantime, let me set this to daytime and to peaceful mode, and then we'll continue on. Okay, and that brings us on to the comparator. And the comparator is probably the last. It sort of is the end of the regular passive components, because at this point everything gets really specific to the block. And with repeaters, it's not as complicated. But with the comparator, these are very complicated things. I'm eventually going to make a full tutorial on how to do these, but in the meantime, there's other videos out there. One by Mumbo Jumbo, completely about how the comparator works. That's one of my go-tos. But it's like the repeater. It actually has a main input, an output, and two side inputs. And these side inputs are for the more complicated part. And it also has two modes, like this. You can right-click. But the one main thing that you can do with a comparator is take a storage device like a chest, a hopper, a barrel, something like that, maybe a shulker box, and you can actually measure how many items are in that container. So right here we see there's none. If we put a single piece of redstone dust, we get a signal strength of 1. And if we go to 2 stacks, let's just go full stacks here. 2 stacks, 3 stacks. You can see it keeps increasing. Now we're up to signal strength of 2. Whoops. And I'm not sure exactly what the function is for how strong the signal is. I think it's proportional to how much of the container is filled. I'm not totally sure though. And there we go. If we fill more, you can see it actually filled up all the way to the end of our line, all the way to here. And that's the main use for a comparator. But another thing it does is it actually does math. It does subtraction, and that's what this mode here is for. It does subtraction between the signal strength of these two, of either this input and that input, or this input and that input. It doesn't do both. But I'm not going to get into that right now because that's a lot more complicated, and this is a basic redstone tutorial, and so I'm not going to mention that right now. But if you really do want to learn right now, there's a good video by Mumbo Jumbo. I'll link that in the description. You can go watch that video. He explains it super duper well, and that's basically how I learned how this works. So go watch that, and we'll move on. Okay, and that brings us on to this block here. This is a full block, unlike all the other ones. And this is called the observer, and what it also has an arrow, just like these other two components, and that's to show which way it's going. And it has a main, I guess you could call it the main input. I guess it's not really quite the same, and then an output. And what the output does is it'll generate a 1-tick pulse, and 1 redstone tick, which means it's 1/10 of a second, and it'll shoot off and on really fast for just a second. And that happens when this block here that it's facing, see it's a face, it's observing it, get it? When that block receives a block update. So let's say if something gets placed, boom, you see a little flash. If this redstone dust changes, boom, a flash. If it changes back, a flash. If it's broken, a flash. If farmland grows, if farmland gets tilled, if let me think, if a daylight sensor changes its setting, things like that. That's what an observer will do. And these are really good for transporting signals in all directions. And stuff like that, and that's basically what they do. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how you can use them because I actually have a full video out on how to use them. I'll link that in the description, and hopefully there's a little thing in the corner there that you guys can click. But that's the observer. It's pretty simple. And let's go on to hoppers. Now hoppers are really different from all the other ones because they transport items. And so if we run, and the way they work is if when you right click to place on something, it'll run into that something. So if we throw an item in here, well, if we do it successfully, I should say, it'll pick up that item and shoot it all the way down over here. And that works in all directions except for up, because it'll just go right back down, which is pretty cool. And hoppers are actually immovable objects, which is important to remember if you ever want to use something that that uses slime blocks and pistons and stuff. These are not able, you can't move these, so just keep that in mind. Now these are most useful just for item transportation, but there's other things you can do. Like you can make a clock, for example, right here, and if you take a comparator, you can put it right there. And this actually will be a clock, because remember the comparator can detect when a container has an item in it. Now you've got a simple clock. This is probably one of the most basic clocks out there, and it's really useful. I've used it in many contraptions. And yeah, that's what the hopper does. These last two, the hopper and the observer, they're a little bit different from the other two because they don't transport a signal quite as well. But I still felt like they were the, if you were to classify them, they would go into this section. And you'll probably understand that why better after the next section when we talk about the active components. Okay, so on to the final part of this section of the video where we're talking about the different types of components. We have active components. And these components are the ones that actually make the redstone machine do something. You know, this is all great and all. You know, you got power, you got signal manipulation, you got, and then finally you got your active stuff. Now this is what actually is sort of the heart of redstone machinery. And these are any components that actually do something with the world. Now some of them, like for example the note block or the redstone lamp, they can be used with observers, or maybe if a sticky piston is pushing a block forward for a redstone line, those could be considered maybe passive components, but overall I think these would be active components. And these are things like doors, redstone lamps that turn on and off, pistons, sticky pistons, note blocks, dispensers, and even TNT. Oh, hold on. Quick little fix there. Why am I lagging that much? Oh, jeez. Okay, but yeah, those are all active components, and this is an analogy that I like to use when I'm thinking of the three different kinds. Is if you think of your redstone machine like a car, right? These power sources, they would be the ignition. You know, they would be starting the car. They would be the ones they'd be the steering wheel. They'd be the ones driving the car. You know, they start it, they maneuver it, they I don't know, they roll down the windows. You know, I don't know. I'm kind of blanking here. Stuff like that. But then these components here, the middle section, that would be stuff like the engine, the electronics for the radio. Can't really think of anything else. But yeah, that'd be stuff like the engine. And then these here would be the wheels, the headlights, things like that. So all together they would what make a car. But you can't have any single one on its own, and you can't do any any other combination than those three. I mean, I guess maybe you could. If it was a really simple machine, like for example, like this door system, that's kind of it. But if you think about it, maybe the fact that the signal is being transported, that would be a passive component, technically. I don't know. But as soon as you get more complicated than that, that's when you need all three of these components. And so that's how I like to think of them. But let's go on, and we can actually talk about powering things, so you can actually make use of this stuff. Okay, now to get started with powering things, there is something you need to know. Now this lever here, this is one example, like levers, buttons, things like that. That's one example of how this thing works. I'm just going to go through every major component individually and how, like the way it powers the blocks around it. Now there's a lot of general rules. It's not like every component's completely different, but it is good to know that there are some differences, and it's good to be aware of those. But eventually it does become second nature. I do think that's worth mentioning, that eventually you just don't even think about it. You're like, yeah, whatever, got it, cool. I can do this, power that, got this. You know, there's hardly ever a time when you need to power something like this weird array. But anyway, for a lever, the lever will power anything within what's called a taxicab distance of exactly 1, like sideways. I guess you could say horizontally, but then again, there is like vertical. There are vertical mounts for levers and stuff like this. So I guess maybe I shouldn't say horizontally. But what taxicab distance means is like if you think of these blocks as a like New York City street grid, then this right here would be 2 moves, like 1, 2. So that would be a taxicab distance of 2. Versus right here, it'd be like with the hypotenuse, it would be like, I guess if you were from here, it'd be like 1.4, 1.4. I don't know. I don't know if that's actually the value. But it wouldn't be exactly 2, you know. But right here, the taxicab distance of 1 would be these 4 directions here, and then directly below it, because it's powering this block here. We'll get more into these powering blocks. We'll get more into that. But in the meantime, this is all it does. You'll notice if I get rid of these so they don't power each other, it won't power anything directly diagonally to it. And it also won't power anything above it. See right here, anything directly in front of it, that won't happen. And you can take this sort of shape and you actually put it on a vertical axis. So if you do something like this, you'll notice that your lever, it'll power this block right here. That's the equivalent of this one right here. It'll power, it'll power this one, and it'll power this one. And then it would, if you could put redstone dust right here, it would power that one. But you can't, so it doesn't work that way. And then the one directly behind it. So if we're thinking, if this is a little bit confusing, think about the blocks that I'm talking about as the redstone dust, not the blocks it's sitting on top of. Think about it as the redstone dust. Maybe I should have done barrier blocks. That might have been easier to see. But either way, we can see that all of this gets powered. And if you don't believe me, right here, you can see that these 2 side inputs get powered as well. And so that shape just kind of directly translates right on top of here. And if you could, there would be a 4th one right, or a 5th one right here, but you can't. So I mean, it's kind of sad. But yeah, that's a lever, and that also applies to buttons, pressure plates, and tripwire hooks. Well, kind of tripwire hooks. It's a little bit different with tripwire hooks, but that's buttons and pressure plates and levers right there. Those are the 3 simplest ones that you'll ever need, and those are the ones that I use all the time. Now, a redstone torch is a little bit different. So whereas this lever was powering something below it, a redstone torch does exactly above it. So you go here, and you'll notice that a redstone torch will power these 4 blocks, but then if you go down here like this, it won't power this bottom one. But if you go right here, it'll power the block directly above it. And when it powers this block, then that block will power this top redstone. That'll make more sense later when we talk about hard powering versus soft powering. But it's pretty much the same thing that's going on here with this thing being powered by that block, which then translates over to this redstone dust here. And so redstone torches are really similar to these other things, except that they're right above here. And the same goes for a vertically mounted one like this. You can't do them on the bottom, of course, but you'll notice that this one, and hold on, you'll notice that this gets powered, that gets powered, and this gets powered, and then on the back, nothing gets powered. But if you go on top, that redstone torch head is facing straight into this block. It will power this one. Now, if you want to make a redstone torch burnout clock, you can just do this. It's kind of cool. And that's for some other mechanics. That's for another video. Don't worry about that right now. But that's how redstone torches work. Pretty simple. And once again, this will become second nature eventually. It's like, oh yeah, that does this, that does that. Whatever, it's cool. No problem. And those are these 2 main power source. Main powering things. That's pretty much all you need to know. Now, but now that's basically starting to power things. Now you need to, into more detail, we'll talk about hard powering versus soft powering. Okay, so the difference between a hard powering block and a soft powering block is exactly what this is. So, well, that was really clear, apparently. So a hard powered block is something that is directly powered by a power source, either a repeater running into here at a signal strength of 15, because it's a repeater, or maybe if there was a block right above this, that's hard powered. Anything with a signal strength of 15 that's being brought straight into there. So if we had for example, this might be easier to demo, demo in real life. So right there, this right here, this would be the first redstone dust, right? So that means that this would be hard powered. Now if we took it out one more block and then took redstone dust, it would no longer be that signal strength of 15. So we'll notice that it won't be hard powered. And I'll show you guys how to check for that in a second. Now, a hard powered block is anything, it powers itself. So if it was a redstone lamp, for example, it'll power. If it was TNT or something, it would power. But a hard powered block can also take an output from a repeater. So let's say, well, here, let's just, for simplicity's sake, let's just power it like that. A repeater can take that output. You'll notice redstone dust, it will like when it's like this too. And it'll basically take any redstone output just like that. And that'll be a hard powered block. Now, to show the opposite, if we go here, this would be a soft powered block. So it's clearly powered, you know. If we go here to test it, that lamp is powered. That is a powered block. But you cannot take a signal out from it. Well, you can with a repeater. I should have mentioned that. Repeaters can take outputs from any powered block. But a hard powered block is able to take one from a repeater, from a dust, I'm rambling. Okay, so a hard power block can have an output taken from it by dust and by a repeater. Now a soft power block like this can only be by a repeater, and I'm pretty sure it'll be a comparator too. Yeah, comparators can too, but that's just use a repeater. It's cheaper, it's easier. Use a repeater. Don't ever use comparators. I will never talk to you or be your friend. Yeah, okay, that got kind of dark. But anyway, that's the difference between hard powering and soft powering. Hopefully that made some sense. If you have questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments, and we'll move on to now transparent versus solid blocks. Okay, now, so there's two main types of blocks in Minecraft for redstone related purposes. Now, the most common is the solid block, and that's pretty much any building block, any wool, any full block pretty much, or almost any full block. With a few exceptions like ice and glass, and basically what that means is that you can use it to power redstone. If you see here, we soft powered this block, and a repeater is taking that output. We can also do it like this. It actually won't. It's not actually running into that repeater, but yeah, it'll power itself. Now a transparent block will never do that, not at all, ever. Here you can see that it's actually not powering that repeater, as a little proof there. And so that's one thing that's pretty useful for things like data storage, keeping your circuits separate, stuff like that. But that's important to remember, so you don't build an entire redstone circuit with glass and then just like, why doesn't it work? And yeah, so that's why. And a general rule of thumb would be anything that's transparent in some way, like glass, and anything that's not a full block, those are transparent blocks. And that includes ice. Ice is actually a transparent block, and any of the color glasses, stuff like that. Those are all transparent blocks, but anything that has a little bit of a piece stuck out of it, like stairs or slabs, things like that, those are all transparent, and pretty much any other block is a solid. Now that includes things like fences and farmland and chests. Those are all transparent because they don't take up the full block. Things like anvils, those are transparent. I think slime blocks are not actually. Funnily enough, I don't think slime blocks are transparent. If we take another repeater. Yeah, slime blocks actually aren't transparent. They're a weird exception to that, but pretty much anything else is. And eventually you'll just get a sense for that. Like I could go through here and just be like, okay, solid, transparent, solid, 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 transparent, 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 solid, solid, solid. Not so sure about these ones actually. I kind of lied. But yeah, eventually you just get a sense for it, and if you build something like, if you typically build with one block, you'll just know. Like if you always build stone bricks as your base, like you'll just know that. It'll be pretty simple. And that's the basics of powering things. Hopefully that helped. And now you should be able to translate taking your power source and moving it to all of these other components. And that'll make more sense in a little bit once we start talking about how to build and set up a redstone machine, and basically like flowcharts for a redstone machine. Okay, so for the third part of this video, we're going to learn how to take all of this stuff and make it into one simple format that all your machines should follow. And it goes like this. So you got your power source, right? And we talked about those over there. This goes into your passive components, which actually process the signal, and that's a lot more complicated than it might, or that's a lot less complicated than it sounds. It's not like a full-blown CPU computer processor. It's not. I mean, you can make that, but no, it's not nearly that complicated. And that works with any memory that you might have. You don't need memory in every single thing. That's why I haven't mentioned it. And also, memory isn't a type of component really in Redstone. And those, they work together and they get you your output. Now your input, sometimes those go into memory. That's for things like, a selector circuit. That'll make more sense like that. But for most of them, for most simple machines, it goes to power source, processing, output. That's basically most machines. If you look at, let's see, if we look at our door over here, we go power source. Our processing is just forward to the door, and then the door opens. That's our output. It's really that simple. And it might seem a lot more complicated, but it's really, that's all it is. And so whenever you want to plan out your machine, think about this process. And this is how I'd say 99% of all redstone machines will work. And sometimes you can use inputs, sometimes you don't. Sometimes your power source is an input. If you hit the button, it'll start. And stuff like that. It's a little bit more complicated than it might seem, but mostly it's seriously just power source, processing, output. It's super simple, and the more you practice it, the easier it'll get. It's all you need to know. But that's all I got planned for you guys today. So that rounds out this video, and I really want to thank you guys for watching. That does mean a lot to me, and I'd also like to ask you to consider subscribing. That would mean a lot too. And in the meantime, this has been Oscar, and I will see you guys in the next video. See you later. Oh, one more thing. If you have any kind of question, comment down below. Please do. I will do my very best to answer you, and my Optifine's being weird because I alt-tabbed and watched the clip. But yeah, either way, I forgot to mention that. Go comment, please. The best way you can learn is by asking people and experimentation.